What does it even mean to be yourself? Ask Albert Camus, and he'll tell you you're the absurd hero, doomed to wander through a meaningless universe, desperately searching for purpose where there is none. Ask Nietzsche, and he'll say you are will to power. Not someone static, but something evolving. You're meant to break your limits, to overcome, to become. Now ask Machiavelli, and he'd probably smirk and say, you are whatever you need to be. Because in the end, power isn't earned through honesty. It's taken through illusion, manipulation, and survival. So, who's right? Or maybe the real question is darker. Maybe we're just patching together fragments of philosophy to dodge the most terrifying truth of all. That deep down, we don't actually know who we are. And that question, it's not just intellectual. It's personal. It hurts. It's the kind of question that keeps you up at night when the noise fades and the masks start slipping. That's exactly what this video is about. We're going to discuss this haunting mystery of identity, morality, guilt, faith, and meaning through 7 brutal, beautiful, mind-bending novels. Not just stories, these are philosophical experiments, psychological autopsies, screams into the void by some of the sharpest minds to ever walk the earth. And by the time we've walked through these 7 novels that I'm going to discuss in this video, one thing will be disturbingly clear. The scariest place you'll ever find yourself trapped in isn't a jail cell, isn't a war zone, isn't a haunted house. It's something we all know in our subconscious. Your worst sin is that you destroyed and betrayed yourself for nothing. We live in a world where many believe we don't matter, that life is meaningless, that we are just dust and atoms with no higher purpose. These dark thoughts began to dominate a whole generation after Darwin's ideas swept across the globe, shaking the foundations of religious belief. Religion, long a moral compass for civilization, began to lose its grip. In its place rose a haunting emptiness, a void that would soon be filled by nihilism. As traditional beliefs eroded, new ideologies like secularism, utilitarianism, and rationalism stepped in. But with them came spiritual confusion. The grand narrative of purpose began to crumble. And in that moment of collapse, a Russian writer emerged, wielding his pen like a scalpel, dissecting the psychological and spiritual consequences of this ideological shift. His name was Fyodor Dostoevsky, and his novel Crime and Punishment is not just a story, it's a prophecy, a philosophical exorcism of modernity's sickness. Let's first go through the novel itself. In Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky introduces us to Rodion Raskolnikov, a destitute student who murders an old pawnbroker, rationalizing that killing a louse will free him to do greater good. But after the act, he spirals into psychological torment, plagued by guilt and paranoia. He meets Sonia, a saintly prostitute, whose selfless faith stands in contrast to his ideological pride. As his mental state deteriorates, Raskolnikov becomes increasingly erratic and isolated, eventually confessing to the crime. Sentenced to Siberia, he begins a slow moral awakening through Sonia's influence. And the novel ends with Raskolnikov holding a Bible in his hands. Now, there was a big reason that a lot of modern intellectuals have, and it causes a problem for the rest of their lives, which I am going to discuss now. Raskolnikov is a bright but impoverished student in St. Petersburg. Handsome and intelligent, but isolated, anxious, and brooding. He rejects friendships, ignores help, and lives mostly inside his head, grappling with radical ideas pulled from philosophy and modernity. In an article he writes for a journal, Raskolnikov introduces a chilling theory. There are 2 types of people, ordinary ones who must obey laws, and extraordinary ones who are above them. These great individuals, like Napoleon, can step over morality to achieve a greater goal. He begins to believe he belongs in that second category, that he is destined to rise above the herd, And that belief drives him to commit a murder, not out of greed or hatred, but as a twisted intellectual experiment. He's not just killing a pawnbroker, he's testing an idea. Can I break the rules and still live with myself? This delusion that he is special, beyond good and evil, becomes his psychological downfall. And this thing doesn't just end with him. We know people around us, and perhaps even in ourselves, where the ego becomes so inflated that we don't see anyone worthy of our time. And this just destroys society and communities on a smaller scale. Another character by Fyodor Dostoevsky is the underground man, who was just like that. But the end results were the same for this one, and that character as well, which I am going to discuss now. What truly pushes Raskolnikov over the edge isn't just poverty or arrogance, it's ideology. He begins to think like a machine. If one evil act can produce more good in the long run, isn't it justified? He overhears a student calling the pawnbroker a parasite, a woman who abuses others for gain. That simple argument becomes a dangerous seed in his mind. What if I remove her from the world and use her money to help the poor? It sounds noble, rational, utilitarian, but this mindset, where the end justifies the means, is deeply corrosive. Dostoevsky doesn't just critique crime here, he critiques a world where moral absolutes are replaced by cold calculations. In this world, killing becomes a matter of statistics, not conscience. And Raskolnikov isn't the only one infected. Another character, Svidrigailov, is even worse. He murders, manipulates, and preys on women without guilt. But when he finally realizes that nothing matters, not power, not pleasure, not love, he takes his own life. Svidrigailov embodies the final stage of nihilism, despair. Like Albert Camus's concept of the absurd man, he lives without meaning. But unlike Camus's hero, he finds no rebellion, no joy in defiance. He simply fades. Now, many people will argue that there is optimistic nihilism, which is happy. And this is where I disagree. Because Svidrigailov was a happy nihilist too. He had a point, a breaking point, where he fell into the void of depression when he was shot by his so-called lover who never loved him. And this breaking point comes in all of our lives, which tells us that nihilism doesn't empower people. It destroys them from the inside out. There is another big reason which makes people kill their morality, which the author has described in his novels. Let's discuss it. Everyone in Raskolnikov's life is drowning in poverty. His mother sends him her last coins. His sister nearly marries a cruel man to save the family. His lover, Sonia, turns to prostitution just to feed her siblings. It's easy to judge desperate choices from a distance, but Dostoevsky forces us to face a brutal truth. When people are stripped of dignity, they begin to lose their sense of right and wrong. Raskolnikov doesn't just kill for ideology, which seems like it, but underneath it, he kills out of desperation. He convinces himself that it's a righteous robbery, done for survival. But Dostoevsky's real warning is this: poverty can corrupt free will, not by force, but by slow erosion. It breaks people down until they can no longer see clearly. Just like Kafka's Gregor Samsa, another character which I will later discuss, who loses his identity in service to his family and job. Raskolnikov's freedom becomes an illusion. His choices are shaped by circumstances, by hunger, and by despair. But Dostoevsky doesn't just leave you there. He knew what suffering was like. He spent years in jail and was saved at the last moment in front of a firing squad. And that is why I respect the man, because he wrote a way out of all these sufferings, because he himself dealt with them. And what he did in Crime and Punishment is what I am going to discuss now. That way out is love, suffering, surrender. Raskolnikov eventually confesses to Sonia, the woman he once looked down on. She becomes his anchor. Despite her own misery, She believes in something higher. Her faith, her humility, her quiet strength, they humble him. He's sentenced to a Siberian prison. But for the first time, he starts to read the Bible. He begins to feel real emotion, to see the value of life, to embrace the very moral laws he once rejected. In prison, he found more freedom than he ever had outside. This mirrors the spiritual journey of Leo Tolstoy, which I will discuss soon in this video. But anyway, Dostoevsky's message is bold and unapologetic. You can only escape the void of nihilism by accepting suffering, embracing humility, and rediscovering meaning beyond yourself. Small victories, my boy. Small victories. A moment of doubt, a flicker of resentment, a lapse in prayer. These are the cracks through which we can worm our way into a soul. Our modern world isn't collapsing in fire or thunder, but in the quiet decay of meaning. Each passing day, good and evil no longer feel distinct. And the truly terrifying part, ordinary people like you and me, are turning dark without even realizing it. But what if we read advice from hell? In the Screwtape Letters, C.S. Lewis offers exactly that, a chilling correspondence between two demons in which a senior tempter, Screwtape, instructs his inexperienced nephew, Wormwood, on the fine art of human corruption. Through this darkly ironic mentorship, Lewis reveals not just theology, but spiritual sabotage, psychological decay, and the slow erosion of moral clarity. Even if you're not religious, the themes here cut deep into the human condition. Temptation, moral confusion, self-righteousness, distraction, and despair. This isn't just a battle of angels and demons. It's a battle of daily choices. Let's dive into this mind game of darkness, starting with how evil doesn't knock down the door, it slips in through the cracks. The safest path to damnation isn't lined with horrors. It's smooth, quiet, and unremarkable. No warnings, no signposts, no sudden jolts. Screwtape warns Wormwood not to tempt his target, the patient, with grand, obvious sins. That might awaken his conscience. No, aim instead for the small surrender, the slow drift. Let him fall without ever knowing he's fallen. Screwtape describes human nature as a blend of will, intellect, and imagination. God wants all three in harmony. The demons work to split them apart. Let the man dream of justice while acting selfishly, or imagine goodness while doing nothing at all. Picture this. A man sees someone struggling on the street. A soft whisper suggests, "You're busy, someone else will help." It's no crime, just a shrug. But 1,000 shrugs later, the man becomes hollow. That's the point. Hell doesn't win with a bang, but with comfortable silence. And that is simply a very helpful Machiavellian tactic that many devilish people use today to get control over ourselves. And there is another big thing that many of us just ignore out of outrage, which is pretty important to discuss here. The devils aren't interested in making humans outright evil at first. They want them confused. The patient is encouraged to make secular friends who challenge his religious views, while still attending church. This duality feels intellectual to him. He thinks he's open-minded, but really he's being pulled in opposite directions. Soon he can't tell what he believes. Screwtape advises Wormwood to feed the patient contradictions about the future, to stir up anxiety, dread, and hollow hope. These aren't just emotions. They're tools to drain spiritual strength and keep the patient too distracted to reflect or pray. In this uncertainty, he will eventually believe that nothing matters. And when nothing matters, evil doesn't need to convince you. It only needs you to stop resisting. Wormwood grows concerned when his patient prays sincerely for his mother. But Screwtape offers a sly solution. Don't stop the prayer, corrupt the motive. Make him feel morally superior for praying. Gradually, he will start judging his mother instead of loving her. Soon, the patient becomes self-righteous. He justifies rudeness to the poor and disdain for the struggling. After all, he makes better choices. Why should he bother helping those who deserve their misfortune? This twisted self-image is ideal for hell, a man who calls himself good, prays regularly, and quietly despises everyone else. And he is living a divided life, which is the core idea presented by the author. What the devils love most is division, not just in society, but within the self. The patient starts hanging out with secular intellectuals while still participating in religious rituals. He feels worldly and wise. But underneath, he's splitting into two incompatible people. He begins to act like an intellectual snob, looking down on others as inferior or naive. He becomes what Dostoevsky once called a man underground, isolated, cynical, and resentful. Screwtape warns that despair must be carefully calibrated. Too much can drive the patient back to God, but just enough will convince him to abandon love and meaning and live entirely in selfish pride. As the patient grows older, he falls in love with a faithful, virtuous Christian woman. To Screwtape and Wormwood, this is a disaster. Her goodness threatens to undo all their work. Wormwood tries to inject insecurity into the relationship. She's too perfect. She won't get you. He twists love into lust, sincerity into suspicion. But he fails. The couple's bond grows stronger through prayer, shared belief, and mutual respect. True love, especially when rooted in spiritual connection, is one of hell's greatest threats. Because in love, the patient begins to resemble God. And let's see who finally won. In wartime, the patient faces an air raid. He feels terrified, ashamed, and small. But paradoxically, this fear doesn't feed hell's fire. It humbles him. He doesn't puff up with pride or demand a reason. He simply fulfills his duty. Screwtape warns Wormwood. If your patient starts asking for mercy, if he suffers but still clings to faith, you're failing. To sabotage this, they keep him slightly exhausted and always hoping for relief that never comes. Screwtape wants joy to seem naive and beauty to feel fake. If they can make pain seem more real than love, they've won. But they don't win. The patient dies suddenly in the raid, not in fear or despair, but with peace in his heart. Screwtape is enraged. Wormwood has failed. And in the end, the soul they hunted slips from their grasp. The Screwtape letters teaches us a haunting truth. Evil doesn't always come with a pitchfork. It comes with comfort, with laziness, with the small choice to turn away just once. Lewis's genius was in showing that the devil doesn't need to destroy us. He just needs to distract us long enough that we do it ourselves. Since we all must die, it doesn't matter when or how. Before discussing the deeper questions, let's first take a quick look at a synopsis of the novel. Albert Camus's The Stranger centers on Meursault, a man who lives with emotional detachment and startling indifference. The novel opens with his mother's death, which he reports without sadness. Mother died today, or maybe yesterday. He drifts through life with apathy, eventually killing an Arab man on a sunlit beach. An act he commits, he claims, because of the sun's glare. At his trial, the court fixates more on his lack of emotion than on the crime itself. Found guilty and sentenced to death, Meursault spends his final days confronting the absurdity of life. In a moment of clarity, he accepts the universe's indifference and finds peace in embracing the absurd. Camus was trying to convey messages that go far beyond the surface, messages hidden deep within our souls, which I will now discuss point by point. Camus, like Sartre, believed in the terrifying freedom of human existence in a world devoid of higher meaning. If death is certain and the universe is indifferent, then meaning itself is a myth. Meursault didn't arrive at this view through deep intellectual meditation, but through experience. After the death of his mother, after witnessing a neighbor beat his dog, after spending lazy Sundays with Marie, and finally, after taking a man's life under a blistering sun, he came to see through the illusions that society builds. Justice, love, guilt, even morality. And that murder, irrational, motiveless, didn't happen out of hatred, but out of discomfort. The trigger was pulled almost instinctively, not once, but 5 times. He later blamed the sun, not metaphorically, but literally. It was absurd, but it was also honest. He didn't try to rationalize. That was his crime. The court demanded remorse, an explanation, anything to fit into a familiar story of right and wrong. But Meursault gave them nothing. Because to him, nothing mattered more than truth. And the truth was, he simply didn't feel what others wanted him to. He also didn't care about death itself, or obviously, about the chaplain who came to him in prison. And that's exactly what I'll talk about in the next chapter. In prison, Meursault waited for execution like a man waiting for the weather to change. Time slowed, and with each passing moment, he let go of the past and the future. When the chaplain visited, offering comfort, Meursault broke, not from fear, but from the frustration of being misunderstood one final time. He didn't want hope. He didn't want God. He didn't want lies. He wanted truth. And the truth was this: the universe didn't care whether he lived or died. He opened himself to the gentle indifference of the world. He saw the stars not as signs, but as sparks. He saw death not as punishment, but as completion. He had been condemned, but he was free. And he had a mindset that made Albert Camus famous. A mindset where nihilism turns into something more profound, something stronger. A better form called absurdism, which I will now explore. His mother died. So what? He was in love with Marie. So what? He killed a man. So what? This wasn't coldness. This was clarity. Camus's The Myth of Sisyphus compares life to rolling a boulder up a hill, only to watch it roll down again, and still continuing, day after day. The point isn't to reach the top. The point is to embrace the repetition. Meursault did the same. He didn't fake emotion to win sympathy. He didn't pretend to love Marie just to be like everyone else. When she asked if he loved her, he said, probably not. When asked if he wanted a promotion at work, he said it didn't matter. He lived in the present, and only the present. To him, that was enough. And paradoxically, that made him more alive than those desperately chasing illusions. That, I believe, was Camus' major teaching. Live with this mindset, and nothing can control you. Because most of what affects us, our shame, our fear, our despair, comes from other people, which brings us to the next, harsher truth. Meursault wasn't sentenced to death because he killed someone. He was sentenced because he didn't cry. In court, his emotional honesty was seen as monstrous. His silence became guilt. His indifference became evil. Witnesses spoke more about his behavior at the funeral than about the murder itself. Society didn't care about truth. They cared about performance. They wanted a story. They wanted Meursault to repent, to show remorse, to claim love for his mother, even if it was a lie. But he refused. And in that refusal, he became truly alone. His trial wasn't about justice. It was about forcing him to conform. And because he wouldn't wear their mask, they made him pay with his life. This is the price we all pay, in different forms, when we don't follow the herd. When someone dares to live without society's masks, they aren't just judged. They are often destroyed. Maybe not physically, but spiritually. We spend our lives chasing permanence in a temporary world, careers, relationships, reputations, redemption. But what if we stopped chasing? What if we, like Meursault, faced the void and smiled? The question of life's meaning, why are we here, tormented Leo Tolstoy, a man who had everything, yet felt nothing. At the height of his fame, the author of War and Peace, Anna Karenina, and a literary rock star of his era, Tolstoy hit a wall, a spiritual and existential wall. He had a vast estate, a loving wife, well, at first, children, and global recognition. But all of it began to feel like shadows on a wall, fleeting, hollow, and meaningless. Around the age of 50, he was seized by a soul-shattering crisis. What is the meaning of life if death swallows everything whole? This is the dark night of the soul that he records in his deeply personal and philosophical memoir, A Confession. It's not just a confession of faith, but of despair, of spiritual nakedness, and of a slow, uncertain climb toward hope. Tolstoy's despair wasn't a sudden collapse. He wasn't raised religious in the traditional sense. Though orphaned early and exposed to Christian rituals, he found most of organized religion hollow, followed out of conformity, not conviction. So, he crafted his life around success, sensuality, and intellectual ambition. For a while, it worked. Parties, books, debates, travel, they filled his calendar, but not his soul. Eventually, the noise faded, the distractions dulled, and in the silence, the question came crashing in, why am I here? What's the point if I'm going to die anyway? As he wrote in A Confession, even sleep became a temporary escape from suicidal thoughts. Tolstoy was staring into the void, and the void stared back. A man runs from a wild beast. To escape, he leaps into a dry well, but at the bottom of the well is a dragon, jaws wide open. He grabs a branch halfway down, clinging for dear life. Then he sees two mice, one white, one black, chewing the branch. Day and night, they gnaw away his time. Above, danger. Below, death, and time is against him. But then, he notices droplets of honey on the branch's leaves. Small pleasures. He tastes them. In the old tale, the man rejoices in the sweetness, ignoring the doom. But for Tolstoy, the honey no longer helped. Love, success, even art had turned bitter. He was too conscious of death, too aware of impermanence. The fable wasn't just a metaphor, it was his life. Everything he once clung to now felt meaningless, like laughing while plummeting into the grave. 4 paths through darkness, the ways people cope with the void. This is the path of distraction. People who scroll endlessly, gossip about celebrities, plan dinner parties, anything to avoid confronting the terror beneath it all. Camus would later call this philosophical suicide, avoiding the question rather than answering it. Tolstoy couldn't do that anymore. He knew too much to forget. Others try to silence the void with wealth, sex, luxury, and status, as if pleasure could overwrite despair. But Tolstoy saw through it. He called this path morally empty, especially when millions suffered in poverty while the elite indulged in excess. Even when he had everything, it wasn't enough. The honey had turned bitter. In A Confession, he wrote that he had to trick himself just to stay alive. He described himself as too cowardly to go through with it. But the mere fact that such a brilliant man entertained it says everything about the depth of his crisis. Then there are those who simply go on, not because they believe in anything, but because they don't know what else to do. They are spiritually numb, emotionally paralyzed, and silently suffering. For Tolstoy, this state was the most despairing of all, neither ignorant nor indulgent, nor brave enough to leap, just stuck. Desperate for answers, Tolstoy turned to the greatest minds. He read Plato, Schopenhauer, Buddha, Darwin. He devoured theology, metaphysics, evolutionary biology, but nothing gave him peace. Science reduced man to atoms. Philosophy danced around the abyss, but offered no bridge. Tolstoy wasn't looking for comfort. He wanted truth. But truth, it seemed, only led to despair. And then, something unexpected cracked through the darkness. The peasants, those with no fame, no books, no estates, just calloused hands, heavy labor, and tired eyes, and yet they lived with a kind of peace. Their lives were hard, but they endured because they had something Tolstoy had lost. Faith. This wasn't abstract belief. It was lived, not reasoned. It was humble, not philosophical. They wept, prayed, and loved, believing that their suffering had meaning, that life had purpose, that something eternal held them in its gaze. Tolstoy realized, the mind can dissect life, but only the soul can survive it. And in a moment of mystical clarity, he wrote, God is life. It didn't come from a church, it came from his own wounded heart. This wasn't blind faith, it was desperate faith, the kind you reach for when everything else has failed. Tolstoy didn't return to traditional religion, at least not fully. Instead, he carved his own path, one rooted in the Sermon on the Mount, nonviolence, humility, and love. He gave away much of his wealth, he simplified his life, he lived for service, not success. He didn't find all the answers, but he found a way to live again. To him, meaning wasn't in theory or applause. It was in surrender. In living not for the self, but for something eternal. If you've ever stared at the ceiling at 2 a.m., wondering what it's all for, you're not alone. Tolstoy was there, and he shows us that even in the pitch-black cave of meaninglessness, there may be a faint light ahead. Sometimes it's not reason that saves us. What in the world has happened to me? Gregor Samsa doesn't say this for dramatic effect. It's his new reality. One morning, this traveling salesman wakes up not in a bad mood or with a headache, but in a monstrous insect-like body. And so begins one of the most haunting and bizarre journeys in literature. This is Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis, a tale that feels less like a fantasy and more like a psychological and emotional X-ray of what it means to be rejected, burdened, and slowly erased from the lives of those closest to you. Kafka uses this surreal transformation to expose a painful truth. Human worth is often measured by productivity, conformity, and appearance. Once stripped of these, what's left? A creature? Or a person desperately clinging to what little is left of his soul? Let's dig into the story of Gregor Samsa, not just as a horror of physical mutation, but as a deeply human tragedy that mirrors our own hidden struggles. Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis begins with the surreal image of Gregor Samsa, a traveling salesman, waking up to find himself transformed into a giant insect. Though Gregor still retains his thoughts and personality, his family recoils in horror. Confined to his room, Gregor loses his job, is injured by his father, and gradually becomes a burden. His sister, initially compassionate, turns cold. In one of his final acts, he crawls out to listen to her violin, but frightens their guests. Humiliated and broken, Gregor returns to his room and dies. His family, relieved, begins making plans for a new life without him. It's not just about turning into a bug, it's about what that transformation reveals. When Gregor wakes up in a form no one understands, he begins to question everything. Why has this happened? What use am I now? What did I do to deserve this? This mental spiral is familiar to anyone who's ever felt stuck, used, or invisible. His questions, seemingly absurd, are painfully human. Gregor's father beats him back into his room. His sister, once affectionate, starts avoiding him, and the isolation takes its toll. What we witness isn't just a physical decline, but a spiritual one. Gregor stops eating. He stops hoping. He stops wanting to be seen. Life becomes unbearable not because of his insect form, but because he's no longer seen as human. Kafka paints isolation not as silence, but as suffocation. And he was ahead of his time. Today, with all our connections, loneliness is one of the most common experiences people report. Gregor's descent isn't dramatic. It's slow, subtle, and painfully real. Just like how depression or burnout creeps into our lives unnoticed until we feel too far gone to crawl out. And there was one thing that led him into this void, which is very important to mention here. Gregor's transformation isn't what breaks him, it's what comes after. Before his metamorphosis, Gregor was the financial backbone of his family. He worked tirelessly, not for himself, but to support them and pay off their debts. But once he can no longer provide, their attitude shifts. Love turns into obligation. Care turns into resentment. Eventually, they see him not as family, but as an inconvenience. Even his sister Greta, who initially feeds and checks on him, becomes cold and impatient. When Gregor risks exposing himself to hear her play the violin, his last grasp at connection, she reacts not with compassion, but with disgust. Her music had stirred his soul, but his presence repulsed her. Their landlords flee in fear, causing the family financial trouble. Greta snaps, suggesting they get rid of him for good. And when he dies, quietly and alone, the cleaning woman casually disposes of his body. The family? They take a day off to enjoy the countryside. Many philosophers, from Nietzsche to Camus, have criticized this tendency of society to reduce individuals to roles, labels, or utility. Kafka shows us this dehumanization in the most literal way, by turning the protagonist into something no longer recognized as a person. It was a way to give them a false sense of free will, justifying their cruelty while pretending it was necessary. Gregor wasn't free even before becoming a bug. He hated his job, loathed his boss, and dreaded every train ride. But he endured it all, not out of passion, but out of duty, to pay off his family's debts. Even in his thoughts, he rarely allowed himself to imagine escape. Kafka doesn't give us a grand hero who dreams of changing the world. He gives us a man trapped in a system that grinds him down. After the transformation, this lack of freedom becomes literal. He's confined to his room. Whenever he tries to leave, he's pushed back, beaten, or shut away. His world collapses into four walls. And this is still our reality today. So many of us live like Gregor, working jobs we hate, dragging ourselves through draining routines, putting on masks just to make it through the day. Why? Often out of fear. Fear of disappointing others, fear of shame, fear of stepping out of line and being exiled like Gregor. Gregor's tragedy isn't just his physical isolation. It's the shame that consumes him. Shame that he can no longer provide. Shame that his grotesque body disgusts his family. Shame that he's become a thing to be hidden, not a person to be loved. He hides under the furniture to avoid being seen. He listens in on conversations and hears how much of a burden he's become. His father sees him as an embarrassment. His sister stops calling him by name. Even his mother, who still loves him, can barely look at him. Shame eats him from the inside out. Gregor's death isn't a murder, it's a surrender. A quiet, lonely end brought on by the belief that he no longer has a place in the world. And we still live under the weight of that shame. Shame about our appearance, our careers, our income, our sexuality, our failures. We stay silent because we fear judgment. We suffer in solitude because we've been told that vulnerability is weakness. But it doesn't have to be that way. Kafka wasn't asking us to embrace shame. He was warning us of its damage. And amid this shame, guilt, and suffering, there's something else we must pay attention to. Something that might just make life worth living. That's what we'll explore next. There is one hauntingly beautiful moment in the metamorphosis that reveals what little light remains in Gregor's soul. As his sister begins clearing out furniture from his room, transforming it from a bedroom into a storage space, Gregor desperately clings to a single item, a portrait of a woman, elegant and serene. It's not just a decoration, it's his last connection to the world of the living. For Gregor, this portrait is more than beauty. It's memory, identity, hope. Even when the world sees him as a monster, he still reaches out to something beautiful, something human. It's a small, nearly invisible act, but it tells us everything. It reminds us of what Dostoevsky once said, "Beauty will save the world." In a world obsessed with productivity, self-improvement, and positive psychology, Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground hits like a gut punch. This isn't a book about growth. It's not a journey toward healing. It's a descent. A deliberate, self-authored collapse into misery and meaninglessness. Meet the Underground Man. A bitter, lonely bureaucrat in 19th century Russia who loathes society, hates himself even more, and refuses to be saved. He lives not in hope, but in defiance, rejecting every philosophy that tries to assign logic or structure to human life. He's Dostoevsky's answer to Enlightenment rationalism and utopian idealism, where thinkers like Chernyshevsky and Bentham proposed that reason and utility could perfect humanity. The Underground Man sneers, "I'll prove I'm free by destroying myself." But here's the twist. As insane as he sounds, his voice echoes eerily through our modern lives. Behind his basement walls, Dostoevsky wrote a prophecy for an age of overthinking, anxiety, intellectual paralysis, and emotional self-sabotage. I'm a sick man, a bitter man, an unpleasant man. He was once a petty government clerk, bound to a job he despised solely to keep food on the table. After receiving an inheritance, he retreats, not just from the workforce, but from society itself, into a decaying apartment in the depths of St. Petersburg. With no friends, no love, and no purpose, he drifts into solitude. But he doesn't hate it. In fact, he finds comfort in his own despair, a bitter joy in being forgotten. This isn't laziness. It's existential resignation. At one point, he confesses that he can't even become an insect. Not because he doesn't want to, but because even that would be too much change. He believes he's too insignificant for transformation, too aware of his futility to even bother. He suspects something's wrong with his liver but refuses to seek treatment. Not because he doubts medicine, but because he wants to suffer. His spite isn't directed outward. It's turned inward, as if punishing himself justifies his bitterness. This mindset is hauntingly familiar. Today, many feel stuck in jobs that bring no fulfillment, retreat into isolation, or ignore their pain out of pride or hopelessness. Like the Underground Man, people often carry invisible wounds, emotional, spiritual, or psychological, and refuse help not out of ignorance, but out of defiance. His illness, both physical and psychological, is the slow decay of a man who knows something is wrong, but refuses to care. Why? Because of his inflated ego. One of the most tragic traits of the Underground Man is that he constantly avoids confrontation. Not because he's timid, but because he believes he's too intelligent to lower himself into everyday squabbles. This supposed superiority traps him in a state of paralysis. He overanalyzes every situation, fantasizing about grand gestures, revenge, or moral victories, but never actually follows through. One example. He crashes a farewell dinner for his old schoolmates, men who have long outgrown him. He's not invited, and they make it clear. When they eventually ditch him, he stews in anger but does nothing. Still desperate to assert control, he seeks out Liza, a young prostitute. He lectures her about selling not just her body, but her soul. But this kindness is hollow. He's not helping her. He's using her to inflate his broken sense of superiority. She's just a substitute target for the revenge he couldn't exact on his old peers. This paints a bitter portrait of modern life. So many of us cling to intelligence or moral superiority as excuses not to take action. We say we're too self-aware, too realistic, too complicated for relationships, risk, or vulnerability. Like the underground man, we narrate our fantasies, but never live them, and then blame the world for our misery. There is another angle to see the self-destruction pattern in intellectuals, because they think too much. And this is what I am going to discuss now. The underground man is trapped not by bars, but by his own mind. He sees his heightened awareness as a badge of intellect. He believes only fools act impulsively, while thinking men like himself are destined to remain still, watching life from the sidelines. But this self-image becomes his prison. His constant second-guessing makes him incapable of simple joy, human connection, or meaningful change. He doesn't walk through life. He dissects it, paralyzed by infinite mental detours. He calls this over-awareness a disease. And he's right. In today's world, this rings especially true. We overthink everything: relationships, careers, identities, crippled by the fear of choosing wrong. Instead of risking failure, we marinate in thought, and we convince ourselves that thinking about life is somehow better than living it. Like the underground man, we hide in our apartments, whether digital, emotional, or physical, where we feel safe from chaos, but safety becomes suffocation, and intellect becomes excuse. Imagine dying and waking up in a small room. No flames, no devils, just 3 people, and eternity. This is the setup of Jean-Paul Sartre's No Exit, his 1944 existentialist play where a man named Garcin finds himself trapped in a room with 2 women, Estelle and Inez. The twist? That room is hell, but not because of fire or pitchforks, because of each other. At the end of the play, Garcin utters a chilling line that still echoes today. Hell is other people. But what made these people so unbearable? Why does their presence alone feel like eternal punishment? In Jean-Paul Sartre's play, No Exit, 3 characters, Garcin, Inez, and Estelle, awake in a plain, windowless salon, expecting hellfire but finding only each other's company. They gradually reveal their past sins. Garcin's wartime cowardice, Inez's manipulative cruelty and murder, and Estelle's infanticide. They soon realize their punishment is not fire or brimstone, but the eternal presence of one another. Inez declares they've been placed together to make one another miserable. Trapped in a psychological prison of mutual judgment, each character is tormented by the other's perception. Even when a door finally opens, Garcin cannot leave, bound not by walls, but by shame and other reasons, which I'm going to discuss now. Ever acted differently when you knew someone was watching? Sartre had a name for this: the look. It's the shift in our behavior when we become aware that others are observing us. In No Exit, the characters aren't tortured with fire. They're tormented by each other's judgmental stares. Garcin, a man who fled from war, isn't haunted by what he did, but by how others see him. He constantly tries to convince Estelle and Inez that he's not a coward. He needs them to believe it, not just for peace of mind, but to define who he is. A man is what he makes of himself, he says. But deep down, he doesn't believe it until others do. Estelle, obsessed with her appearance, even looks for her reflection in Inez's eyes because there's no mirror. That need to be seen, to be validated, to control how others perceive us. It's what keeps them all trapped. Think about it. You're enjoying a burger alone at a cafe, and suddenly someone starts staring. You instantly become self-conscious. Their gaze objectifies you. You're no longer just eating, you're being judged. That power others hold over us, that's the real hell Sartre talks about. Sartre believed that once someone sees us, they stop us from being just ourselves. We become the person they see, and that distorts our freedom. We're no longer authentic, we're a performance. And this is what leads to bad faith. At one point, Garcin, desperate to prove he's not a coward, starts pounding the room's bell, hoping someone will come and drag him out. The door even opens. Freedom is right there, but he doesn't leave. Why? Because even outside, he fears what Inez and Estelle will still think of him. This is Sartre's concept of bad faith, lying to ourselves to escape the weight of our choices. Garcin can't face what he did. He wants others to rewrite his story so he doesn't have to. But no one can save him from himself. That's his true punishment. On the other hand, Inez is brutally honest. She knows she's done horrible things. She owns it. She doesn't lie to herself to feel better. When she tells Garcin, "You are your life and nothing else," she's giving the most existential truth of the play. You are what you've done. No excuses, no masks, no spin. Estelle, meanwhile, can't accept the reality of who she is. She drowned her baby and caused her lover's suicide, yet continues pretending she's the victim. Her obsession with image over truth is the perfect example of bad faith, running from responsibility while craving approval. And this is what we call hypocrisy, which is worth explaining here through Sartre's mind. What makes the room so torturous isn't just the past crimes. They're all guilty of serious moral failings. It's the lies they tell about those crimes. No Exit is a masterclass in hypocrisy. They all want to be seen as better than they are. That's the tragic irony. Their punishment is to be stuck in a room where lies don't work and masks fall apart. In real life, we do the same. We curate ourselves on social media, wear moral masks, and build identities around half-truths. But under that surface lies the same human flaw, a desperate need to be validated without being vulnerable. Sartre exposes this. The hell isn't their sins. It's the way they cling to false images of themselves while demanding others believe them. The room could have been bearable, maybe even beautiful, if they had chosen truth over pretense, compassion over manipulation. But they didn't. They fought, judged, seduced, and lied. They turned each other into their worst nightmares. Yet Sartre hints at a way out: radical honesty. If they accepted their pasts, took responsibility, and respected each other's freedom, that same room could have become something else. Connection is double-edged. It can wound or heal. People can trap us in cages of judgment, or they can set us free by accepting who we are. The choice is ours. Heaven or hell, it's all in how we treat each other.